stutterer. So I am a person who stutters, and above anything else in my life, I am a friend, I am a fiance. I get married in a month, I'm very excited. I'm a sister, daughter, all of these other things. But this title has been the most impactful sort of identifier in my entire life. And it isn't the physical act of stuttering that is so demoralizing. It's, how stuttering tends to make me feel. I feel incredibly ashamed, right? Like, I don't sound like other people. And so, therefore, I don't have the same value as other people do. I feel incredibly embarrassed a lot of the times because, again, like I have to struggle to say even the simplest things, even my name. And it is incredibly embarrassing every single time. I also feel occasionally just very overwhelmed. I think about communication all the time. I think about, how it's so unfair that, I have to go through this thing and, other people don't. However, there are a couple of things about stuttering that have been incredibly positive in my life. And it's taught me, two incredibly valuable skills. The first is that it has taught me how to be a much stronger and agile communicator. The other is that it has forced me to be a lot more adaptable to change. So these two things, right? Strong communication and being, very comfortable with change. They have one sort of big overarching thing in common. And that thing is empathy. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a couple of moments, but first I want to talk more about me. This is me when I'm around 3 years old. I know, I'm painfully adorable. And this is around the time that I began to show signs of stuttering. So my parents were a little bit concerned, but a lot of kids who are, around 3 or 4, have some kind of speech impediments. And so a lot of those kids, they, outgrow it around the time they hit first or second grade. And so even though they were concerned, it wasn't, a life or death situation. And so, as time kind of went on, as, I grew up, as I got a little bit older, it became incredibly clear that, I was going to have to deal with this for probably my entire life. And so I began to sort of develop these communications neuroses. I have sounds that I have a very difficult time saying. And so I would avoid words that began with those sounds. I would do everything possible to, not stutter. And so I would use a lot of filler words like those kinds of things. And I eventually came to a point where, I was just so terrified to talk to people that I just stopped talking. And so after, I got there, I realized that I can't, continue to pursue the kind of life I want and to have very strong relationships and a full existence if I stopped talking. And so I decided to really, face this fear, right? So the first thing that I had to do, though, is kind of accept the way that stuttering had really shaped my communication, right? So, I would be, in the beginning, I would be a lot more focused on like, okay, I'm only going to say the things that I know I'm going to be able to communicate, right? And so after I decided to face my fear, I said, well, how can I be a part of the conversation in a way that is going to make both of us feel comfortable? And so in shaping my communication, I was able to have just more sincere conversations with people as a result of just being incredibly open about stuttering. And so the other thing that stuttering did was force me to deal with change. And so again, in the beginning, before I decided to face this fear, I would deal with that change by just being like, okay, I'm gonna stutter, I'm not gonna talk anymore. However, after I decided, like, okay, I have to face this fear, it was, how can I, come into this conversation and be as comfortable and as confident as possible, right? How can I, deal with the stares, are you forgetting your name, right? Like those things that people do and say when you are different, right? How do I deal with those things? And so, after several years of trying to find a way to cope with stuttering, I decided that the best way to sort of to face the fear was to pursue public speaking, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. However, you only live once. And so I gave my first talk in 2014, and it was on stuttering and marketing. And so I talked about a lot of the same things that I'm going to talk about today. I talked about communication. I talked about change. And then I also just touched on the topic of empathy. And so from there, I would continue to speak at events and conferences and companies. This is a shameless plug here. I have a course on LinkedIn called Communicating with Empathy, and it's free of charge if you would like to watch it. And so after doing this for a couple of years, people began to bring me into companies to talk about, communication, to talk about, how to engage empathy. And so I, had to call myself something. And so I called myself an empathy consultant. And so I focus on, teaching managers how to, overcome disengaged teams and toxic cultures through engaging empathy. And so that brings us to the thing that we are going to talk about today, and that is empathy. And so the goal here is to just, give you guys a thing or two to think about whenever you are sort of faced with a difficult conversation or a difficult interaction when you are at work. So let's begin with why is empathy important? Well, empathy is going to drive every company's bottom line. How do I know that? That's what studies have shown. I'm just going to go through just a couple of quick stats here, and then, we're going to move on. So 92% of employees feel that empathy is undervalued, while 90% of employees would be a lot more likely to stay with a company that empathized with their needs. So what do these numbers mean? It means that empathy is going to help companies and teams retain the top talents. A couple of more numbers. 87% of CEOs feel that empathy is tied to a company's financial performance, while 80% of employees are going to be willing to work longer hours for an empathetic employer. What do these numbers mean? It means that empathy is going to make companies and managers a lot more effective. A lot of the times when we are talking about these softer skills like communication, like empathy, we view these things as only valuable, kind of in a vacuum, or as valuable in our personal relationships. However, it's been proven that these soft skills are incredibly valuable in corporate settings. So I've told you, why empathy is important, but how about we define it, right? Because I've heard a lot of different definitions of this. I go to a lot of conferences, a lot of companies. I've heard a lot of speakers who have a lot to say about this topic. And so I've heard, two very distinct definitions. And the first is the dictionary definition of the ability to share the feelings of another person, which is pretty straightforward. The other definition I hear, and I hear this one all of the time, and I don't know why, but people get super pissed when they talk about empathy, and then it's like that thing that you have to do in order to not be a complete a-hole at work. And, you know, even though I agree with both of these definitions, you know, I don't really feel that they are incredibly helpful, right? Like they don't give you a correction. And that's because empathy as a noun is an idea. It is intangible. It doesn't tell you the things that you have to do in order to engage it and to show it, right? So, you know, I got to thinking, like, how can I, you know, explain empathy in a way that, you know, everybody understands, right? Like, is there another concept that is both, you know, widely known and also, you know, very elusive and hard to explain? And then I figured it out. It's love. Oh. When you are first in love, it is the coolest feeling in the entire world. You and this person can do anything together. This is literally the only person in the world who really understands you on like a deeper level, right? And then you guys send just ridiculously long text messages and emails, and if you're, you know, over 35, really long voicemails about, you know, how much this person is just the most spectacular human being. You do dumb stuff just because why? You know, like everybody has to know that you are so in love, and hashtag bae all day, forever, I'm in love. It's amazing. So a couple of months go by, you like really get to know this person, and all of a sudden, all those things that were so cute are like not cute anymore. And then it's like, oh, hold on a second, right? Like in the beginning, this was easy. I could just be around you all the time, and it was just great. But then after a while, it becomes a job. And you all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is a thing that I have to do. I have to engage this. I have to, you know, constantly chase after that feeling I had in the beginning. And then I have to constantly choose this person and show them, you know, every single day how much I care for them, right? So love as a noun is an idea. It is an incredible idea. It's the best idea. However, it is just an idea. It is completely intangible. As a verb, it's a choice. And it's a choice that you have to make every single day. So let's bring this back to empathy. As a noun, it's an idea. It's a really cool idea. It's probably the best idea that you can do, you know, on your teams at work. However, it is, again, incredibly intangible. As a verb, it is a choice. And it's a choice that you have to make, you know, every single day. So this talk is called Creating Cultures of empathy. And so in order to, you know, really talk about engaging empathy on teams, we also have to talk about culture. How am I doing on time? Okay, we're good. So empathy is going to shape culture a lot more than any other core value. So let's just talk a little bit about culture here. So when you like see this word, work, what do you think of? You think of, you know, the office. You think of cubicles, of, you know, conference calls, of tons and tons and tons of emails, and, you know, all of those things. However, the way we work is changing, right? Teams are increasingly remote, working entities, right? Like the vast majority of companies, have shops and teams that are, all over the world. And so, this global workforce is a part of the reason why culture is an incredibly, hot topic. So, what exactly is culture? So, I believe that this is by Inc. magazine. Yeah, so Inc. defines culture as the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. So when I see this definition, I see two different parts. And the first part is the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs. Now, I'm just gonna quickly put up, all of the definitions of these. However, I feel like all four of these concepts are kind of all circling around the same point. And that is the experience people have when they are interacting with you or your company. So the other part of this definition is this final part, defining its nature. And I think that this is probably the most important part of this definition because, culture defines you. However, it doesn't define you in the way that you think it does. So culture cannot exist without first building a sense of community. Now, I'm going to talk about community here only for a couple of minutes because I think it's important. Like when we think of communities, like we think of the places that we live. We think of our, neighborhoods. We think of our friends. But the kind of community that I'm talking about is a fellowship of people who have similar goals, similar, commonalities, right? And so there's a really big community sort of movements happening now, right? You've got the Special Olympics, you've got Me Too, the TED Talks, the Stuttering Association, obviously. And, like these communities, they, when you see these brands, when you see these logos, you can pretty much immediately, identify like what these groups' core values are, right? And so, because it's so simple to, say what these organizations are, focused on and what they are all about, we are very familiar with their culture and how they, go out into the world and create and engage. So the big things are going to define your culture. So if you think about, a couple of companies who, have a pretty well-known cultures, it's going to be either for an incredibly good reason or an incredibly bad reason, right? If you think of a company like Uber, they had a culture that was quite terrible for quite a while. And so, because of several people in a company of, 20,000, a lot, I have no idea, their culture was defined by the actions of, a few people inside the company. On the other side of that, you have a company like Netflix, where, the culture there is one of creativity, is one of freedom, and it's one of empowerment, right? So, these companies are known for these really big things. So, the big things create your culture. However, the small things, the big things define your culture, right? So the small things are going to create your culture. If you go back to, the Uber example, I'm fairly sure that not every single person who was at the company engaged in those, bad behaviors. However, it was the actions of a few that created this terrible culture. And so in order to, create a culture of empathy and to create, a great environment, you have to focus on those small things, those everyday behaviors that are going to have, a very big impact on your culture. So now to kind of close us out here, I wanted to talk about this empathy mindset. And, in order to create a culture of empathy, I do think that, individuals and teams have to have some sort of system in place to sort of fall back on when things get challenging. And so I call this the empathy mindset. So when you're creating a culture of empathy, it's when you're choosing those, small everyday actions, which we already talked about. But these are the actions where you are going to truly engage empathy. So I want to say first, though, that, every single person's process here is going to be a little bit different. The thing that, I am about to show you is the thing that, I engage in every single time I find myself in a difficult situation. And so for, my personal empathy mindset, it's 3 steps. It begins with patience, it goes to perspective, and then it closes out with connection. So let's begin with patience. So when we think about patience, we think about waiting, right? But this isn't the kind of patience I'm talking about. I am talking about really focusing on what the other person is saying and feeling. So imagine that you are in a very difficult conversation and things are beginning to get a little bit uncomfortable, right? So the first thing that a lot of us do is that we, immediately are going to go on the offensive, and we get, upset. We place blame, and we try to, convince the other person how it isn't on us, it's on, other people. So this is the opposite of patience. When you are being patient in a difficult interaction, the first thing that you want to do is pause, is to stop and to, take a deep breath or, excuse yourself. Just do anything that you have to do in order to really just calm down and sort of reset, right? And so the other part of patience is remembering the why. Almost every single conversation that we have when we are at work has some sort of goal in mind. These aren't just, idle talks. And so if you, are in a very challenging conversation, always remember the reason why you were there. So that is patience. The next is perspective. Now, when I say perspective, I mean, genuinely, attempting to understand where this other person is coming from. Now, an easy way to get perspective quickly is to remind yourself that, I don't know the entire situation, right? I only know what people are showing me and what they tell me. And so if you take a step back and you remind yourself of that, it's going to be a lot easier, to get perspective. So a couple of the action steps here are rephrasing what that person said. Now, when people are talking to us, we don't always hear what they said. We hear our opinion of what they said. And so by rephrasing, we're going to get clarity on the thing that they said. And then it also is going to be an assistance in eliminating a little bit of bias. And then, of course, to focus on understanding. The final step here is connection. And here's where, you begin to speak. When we get upset or excited, we don't always think about the things that we're saying. So to connect, we should speak with intention, speak with the end goal in mind. And, this is the beginning, right? Every single time we are talking to someone, it is the beginning of, where, our relationship is going to go. So focus on connection. So this is just, all three of them together. I have patience at the bottom because it is really the foundation of, empathy and of having perspective and getting to connection. So to close this out, the big ideas here are that empathy is a verb, and it is a choice that you have to make every single day. Culture is going to be the result of community, and so if you focus on building a really solid community, your culture is going to take care of itself. And finally, figure out, your empathy mindset, to foster a, collaborative environment and to create the kind of culture that everyone can feel included in. And then I like to close out all my talks with just a little word of, encouragement. You are going to fail. I know that sounds so encouraging, but failure is okay. We all fail at things all the time. All failing points to is that you attempted, right? Failure and neglect do not live in the same house. And so if other people are seeing you attempting to, create a better culture, to create a good community, to engage empathy, that is going to go an incredibly long way. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't see any. Oh, here's one right over here. Let me run the mic over to you.
Hi, thank you for sharing your knowledge, by the way. I found that really interesting around the mindset, and certainly be taking some of that away. I think what you've taught us was really interesting in solving a potentially difficult situation or a difficult conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm just interested to know if, can empathy be learned, or is there a deeper, is empathy within you, or can it be learned, or is it genuine, and what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of research on this, and the science says that only a very small part of empathy, is innate, and that the vast majority of it is going to be learned just from our experiences of dealing with people as kids, and then teens, and then as adults. And then, I personally feel like, we are constantly learning how to heal, with people all the time, right? It kind of goes back to communication. People are constantly teaching you how to talk to them and, how to communicate, right? This is the same thing with empathy. People are constantly teaching us, how to, have empathy for them. And a lot of the times, I think that we do see it, and we do our best to, really learn how to do it. So, short answer, absolutely. I do think it can be learned. It does just take some, time, patience, and just paying attention.
Anyone else? I think I saw another hand up. Yeah.
Hi, Hiya, thank you
Hi.
very much for that. That was really, really fascinating. And I think, as everyone will probably be working with quite a lot of different stakeholders as well as colleagues, obviously that culture does take time. And I think obviously getting people quickly up to speed with that culture and building that team with temporary members of the team, like clients, for example, it's something that you'd want to build quite quickly. Do you have any tips on kind of how to, or prerequisites that are the first things that you should be kind of covering off to just really get everyone on the same page quite quickly and then just hit the ground running with building that culture?
I think that the first thing that teams need to really consider is that there's always going to be change, right? Like people, aren't going to be at companies for, their entire lives. And so there's always going to be a brand new person. There's going to be a person who's going to be coming back from, going on sabbatical or something like that. And so, the first thing, I help people is to really, focus on just being comfortable, like in that change. And then the other thing I tell people is to focus on the communication piece. I feel like communication is going to be the easiest way to sort of create a different environment. And so, the way people speak, to other people is going to be a reflection of the things that they're thinking and feeling. And so if we focus on very, positive, forward communication, then it's going to be a lot simpler to sort of create, a better environment. There are, tons of blog posts and studies on, the different kinds of communication to, use on teams. I feel like the main thing is to, use inclusive communication. And by that, I mean, if there's, 8 white guys on a team and, one black person, it's going to be a lot easier for, the 8 white guys to kind of all speak in the same way and, have their own sort of thing going on. And then, have this other person just be like, well, I don't, I don't understand that lingo or I don't identify with it. So inclusive communication is going to be the first and probably the biggest thing to, help. Did that help? Yeah. Okay, great.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. Let's give Sharon one more round of applause.